NATO has formally stated that the damage to the Nord Stream pipelines was caused by sabotage. They said there will be a collective response. Many NATO member states are pointing the finger at Russia. Following this, we saw Russian and Chinese warships off the coast of Alaska. These are just a few of the stories signaling greater war may be on the horizon. There's many stories around this, pertaining to this, notably TikTok, Chinese cyber warfare, infrastructure damage caused by cyber attacks. But the more obvious is TikTok. In China, TikTok doesn't allow wokeness and far left ideology. In the US, seemingly all they promote, for the most part. We, for instance, at Timcast IRL are banned from TikTok for no formal reason. We don't know why. They just removed us. But now we have one of the most alarming stories, which should send shivers down your spine. China has opened overseas police stations in the US and Canada to monitor Chinese citizens. They're treating Europe, Canada, and the US as if it's already their territory. They're starting to develop a Chinese Communist Party apparatus within our countries. They've probably been there for some time. We've also noticed that land is being sold or leased to Chinese communist interests close to military bases or just purchased in general. Ladies and gentlemen, this is colonization. We've been seeing it for some time. But what do you think is going to happen when the Chinese Communist Party, with police stations in the U.S., what do you think happens when war is formally declared? Now, of course, you may then expect the U.S. to shut these facilities down. They shouldn't exist in the first place. Apparently, it's already illegal. But this means there's going to be many individuals working for the Chinese Communist Party in the United States should war break out. And that means internal strife. It means sabotage. And I think it means outright already that China is preparing for war with the U.S. And how do you handle something like that? We've known about this for some time. I believe it was Mike Pompeo who said during the Trump administration that China had infiltrated every level of the U.S. government. And he's probably not wrong. We know about the 1,000 Talents programs, I believe it was. Many academics are on the payroll for China. How do we expect to win a war that China has long prepared for and we haven't? Unless, of course, there's some secret operations we don't know about, but part of me doesn't believe it. Too many in the United States, especially the political elites, the political class, have been deferential to China for a long time, giving away our manufacturing and weakening the core of the American economy, of the U.S. economy. So, although they may not have the strongest Navy or Air Force, they have, I believe, one of the largest standing ground armies, and they have the ability to fight in their way. Many people respond to videos I do about the threat of war with China, and they say, they're a paper tiger. We got nothing to worry about. They got one aircraft carrier. But is that really what we need to be concerned about? I'd be willing to bet. While that's true, it's likely due to the fact that they've shifted their focus into cyber warfare. And they're likely working on viruses, worms, and other exploits to destroy critical infrastructure in the U.S. They shut down our power, and we're doomed. Then we won't win a war. You need nuclear power, you need oil to run these warships. Now look, the U.S. is strong, mighty nuclear arsenal. But China seems to be working with Russia now, doing joint military operations. And this shows they've effectively been colonizing everything, setting up or planting the seeds of the Chinese Communist Party in these countries. They say it's to monitor Chinese citizens. And we know that there are stories about this. People who are former Chinese citizens speaking out against the Communist Party, getting visits. But this, in my opinion, is they're fortifying themselves. In the event a war breaks out, this is bad news for the United States. And they'll have to weed these out before any moves can be made, which means the U.S. probably has to act now. Well, let's read about this story. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member. In order to support our work, our journalists are working around the clock, fact-checking news, reporting on the ground, and it's only possible because you sign up as members. That's right. That's it. We like doing news. We think it's important to do. I think it's fantastic that we have so many great journalists and reporters working for us. And they only do the job because people agree and spend that money to support the news reporting. You'll also get access as a member to the uncensored members-only show Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m., as well as the Cast Castle vlog, Tales from the Inverted World, and we got new shows coming out shortly. So become a member, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show, be the notification. People have been reporting that they're not getting notifications for this channel and my other channels anymore. Surprise, surprise, the midterms are coming up, and this is the kind of information you need to make your vote count. So, share the video if you want to support the work. Take a look at this from Fox News. They report, China has opened dozens of overseas police service stations around the globe to monitor its citizens living abroad, including one location in New York City and 3 in Toronto. These operations eschew official bilateral police and judicial cooperation and violate the international rule of law, and may violate the territorial integrity in third countries involved in setting up a parallel policing mechanism using illegal methods, reads a report by Safeguard Defenders, a human rights watchdog released earlier this month. It's called a parallel government. Let's talk about government real quick. How about we do that? A mafia, a mob, a shakedown. What do they say? We're going to protect you. You pay up. The old trope is that the mobsters go to your business and say, protection money. You give us money, we keep you safe. It may start from a noble endeavor. Poverty in an area results in crime. A group gets together and says, don't bring your crime here, but hey, we can't do this unless you pay up. And eventually they're saying, look, we are protecting the neighborhood. You are the one person who won't pay. That's not fair, is it? Baseball bat, pay up. With this, you see the emergence of isolated or parallel governance. The mafia is now exerting authority the government doesn't have control in this area because they do, and people are more likely going to say, who's the most likely to actually come after me if I don't abide by this? So who are they going to pay? Who's getting paid? Probably not the government, unless they intervene to, quote unquote, pacify the area. China's planted the seeds. They may say it's just about their own citizens, but over a long enough period of time, they're going to start asserting legal dominance in an area. People will start saying things like, well, the cops don't show up anymore. Crime is running rampant. I can only rely on this Chinese police station. Think about it. Crime in New York is through the roof. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying it's a strong possibility. If China starts providing resources to these extra legal stations, but people know you file a complaint with the Chinese police department and they'll solve your crime problem, they will. If the police in New York won't do it, the authority falls to someone else. The report, titled 110 Overseas, details China's extensive efforts to combat fraud by its citizens living overseas, in part by opening several police stations on 5 continents that have assisted Chinese authorities in carrying out policing operations on foreign soil. Europe is home to most of the police stations, with locations spread across the continent in places such as London, Amsterdam, Prague, Budapest, Athens, Paris, Madrid, and Frankfurt. North America is also home to 4 of these stations, with 3 locations in Toronto and 1 in New York City. Now, there's just 1 here in the U.S., so not all bad just yet. In all, there are 54 such stations in 30 different countries. They are colonizing, expanding, and asserting cultural dominance. The report details how China has attempted to combat the growing issue of fraud and telecommunications fraud by Chinese nationals living abroad, running operations that have resulted in 230,000 Chinese nationals being persuaded to return to China voluntarily over the last year to face criminal prosecution. Don't know if I believe it. The Chinese government has claimed the stations provide vital services to its citizens living abroad, though the report notes that many of the services are those that would be traditionally carried out by an overseas embassy. Instead, the report argues that the stations have been used to enhance China's overseas law enforcement capabilities in possible violation of international law. At the very least, you should be worried about what's happening. Quote, as these operations continue to develop and new mechanisms are set up, it is evident that countries governed by the standards set by universal human rights and the rule of law urgently need to investigate these practices to identify the local actors at work, mitigate the risks, and effectively protect the growing number of those targeted. How many of these people that the CCP is accused of fraud, how many do you think are speaking out against the CCP? So they in turn claim those are lies and therefore fraud. I don't trust them. If people are in this country, then it is the law enforcement of this country, Canada or the European nations, to deal with this. But it seems China has been colonizing the world. And this is just planting the seeds. It's the first step. And it seems like things are going to be getting worse. From Lawfare blog, water wars. U.S. counters Beijing's reaction to Pelosi visit with $1.1 billion in arms sales to Taiwan. I can't imagine that China would be too happy about this. They say following House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, Beijing reacted by holding military exercises around the island. We know what happened. They began firing missiles over the island. They began encircling the island. And then things slowly simmered down. But many other U.S. officials, politicians, started traveling there. They're now saying that the U.S. responded by giving $1 billion in arms sales to Taiwan. Where do you think this goes? I'll tell you quite simply. Don't take my word for it. Writing for Real Clear Defense, China could decide now is the time for war with America. Well, there you go. Written by James Holmes. The aircraft carrier Harry S. Truman participates in a composite unit training exercise, which evaluates the strike group's ability as a whole to carry out sustained combat operations from the sea, ultimately certifying the HST-CSG for deployment. It starts with a big old 1945 for some reason. It says, will a peak China decide now is the time for war with America? Hal Brands and Michael Beckley have breaking news from 1832. Namely, that it sometimes makes sense for the weak to pick a fight with the strong. No less an authority than Karl von Clausewitz affirms it. Suppose, postulates Clausewitz, a weaker contender is in conflict with a much more powerful one and expects its position to grow weaker every year. If war is unavoidable, should it not make the most of its opportunities before its position gets worse? In short, it should attack. Verily, Clausewitz is a man for all seasons. If you know your important trend lines are turning against you, if you expect your strategic standing vis-a-vis your antagonist to be worse next year than this, then he advises you to strike now. Otherwise, you'll get less than you might. Your window of opportunity might even slam shut by next year. Simply put, anybody who understands market economics knows what this means. You want to buy real estate. I'll tell you, we're trying to set up a brick and mortar location so we can do like a community center, game shop, skate shop kind of thing. And these building owners are like, nah, I'm going to wait. And I tell them, like, you sell now, you're going to get what you get. And it's not what you want. You wait till next year, you're done. You'll never sell. Now you're underwater. Sell now before it's too late. Meaning the person in that position knows they're going to lose out in the long run. In this instance, China may expect it's going to lose no matter what. Best to make its move while it has some advantage out of fear. By next year, they will be much worse off. U.S. Coast Guard confirms Chinese and Russian warships off Alaska. 7 vessels from China and Russia were seen in formation off the Aleutian Islands. Aleutians are cool, by the way. They stretch very, very far. But this, I think, is a very important story. The U.S. Coast Guard in Alaska came across Russian and Chinese vessels on an ordinary patrol earlier this month. In an announcement on Monday, the agency said the surprise encounter was a formation of Russian and Chinese ships that came on 19 September about 75 miles north of Kiska Island in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. That was when the U.S. CGS Kimball, a U.S. Coast Guard vessel, spotted a guided missile cruiser from China in the Bering Sea off Alaska's coastline. While announcing an ongoing counter-response this week, the U.S. Coast Guard said it soon spotted 2 other naval ships from China, along with 4 Russian naval vessels that were inside the U.S. exclusive economic zone that surrounds the Alaskan coastline and that of the Aleutian Islands. Where do you think this goes? We saw something similar in the past few months with Hawaii. I'd like to say it goes nowhere. I hope it goes nowhere. But I think we're heading towards war. I think it may be inevitable. Maybe not. I really don't know. I really don't. But according to U.S. News, fears about World War III are growing amid Russia-Ukraine war, survey finds. As Russia escalates its nuclear threats, a survey suggests a world on edge. Russia's unprovoked war with Ukraine. Let me pause right there, U.S. News. Unprovoked? That is an opinion statement, not a fact. There are many arguments to be made about provocation from NATO expansion. There are many arguments to be made that those don't qualify as provocation. But to assert one or the other is your humble opinion. They say rather the fighting appears more likely to escalate. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced last week that he will push 300,000 reservists into service. A stark new finding from an international survey suggests the world is taking these threats and their broader global implications seriously. In a survey of more than 17,000 people across the world, 3/4 of respondents agreed with the statement, quote, "I fear we are moving closer to World War III." The findings are culled from the U.S. News and World Report Best Country Survey, which was fielded this year from April 30th to July 13th and used for an annual perception-based is used for an annual perception-based rankings of countries. I just want to point out, in April to July, let's just say mix April 30th. That was a while ago. Many people thought that we were heading towards World War III then. What would happen if you surveyed them now, pointing out what's going on with the Nord Stream pipeline or with secret police stations being set up in foreign countries by China or their ships entering the U.S. economic waters? Yeah, sorry. I think we're close. The share of respondents who agreed that we're heading towards global war rose above 80% in 5 countries: Indonesia, South Korea, Spain, Thailand, and the U.S. Let me just repeat that. It was above 80% in the United States. Those surveyed within the age range of 25 to 35 were the most fearful, with 76% worrying about nations moving closer to another global conflict. But Rudra Sil, a professor of political science and the director of graduate studies at the University of Pennsylvania, says that while the findings make sense, he cautions against people being overly fearful. The key word here is closer, which is a relative term, and I think relative to a year ago. I guess everyone could say we're a little bit closer. But I would interpret that as a reason for thinking that Armageddon is coming and that we should all start sorting things. But would I interpret that as a reason for thinking that Armageddon is coming and we should all start storing things in our basement? No, I don't see it that way. I'm going to pause it right there and just say, now is the time to prepare. I'm not saying to dig a 30-foot deep bunker and fill it with beans. It's going to last you for 30 years. I'm saying have some canned goods and some water. Put the water in glass, not plastic. Have some emergency tools. You don't need to buy 30 acres in the woods. You have a garage. I would recommend getting away from cities for a variety of reasons. The riots, culture war, potential civil war, but also this. But I would say wherever you are, you got matches. We have rain matches. You ever see them? They're like magnesium matches. They're huge and thick, and you can light them underwater. It's crazy. That's how powerful these matches are. And they're cool, and they come with this little strike. I don't know if you can light them underwater. You can light them and put them underwater, and they won't go out. It's actually kind of scary when you think about it, because sometimes you need them to go out, but these matches won't. Have you downloaded a survival guide to your phone? It may be that nothing happens. We certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. I'd love to just play video games all day and enjoy some wings and watch, Game of Thrones or something. Would be nice, wouldn't it? But maybe, even with them, with all the news we're saying, there's no sign of de-escalation internationally or nationally. Maybe then we should consider something bigger is on its way. Thucydides' trap dictates that when a rising economic power is about to supplant the dominant power, war breaks out. Maybe China thinks they can or can't. Either way, there's reason for them to start a war, especially with Taiwan in conflict. Then you have, let me just stress it again, the secret police stations. That to me is creepy and crazy. And then you have the overt infiltration. In a story from just a few days ago, former Army reservists convicted of charges tied to spying for China. A former Army reservist was found guilty on 3 counts of spy-related charges on Monday, including acting as an unregistered foreign agent for the People's Republic of China during the course of 5 years, according to the Department of Justice. Ji Xiaokun, 31, entered the Army Reserves in 2016 as part of the Pentagon's military accessions, vital to National Interest Program, or MAVNI, and the rank of specialist. The program is meant to vet and recruit legal aliens whose skill sets are deemed critical to the military. Ji, a resident of Chicago, received his master's degrees in electrical engineering in 2015, yada, 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 yada. Between 2013 and 2015, Xi exchanged 36 messages and met several times with high-level MSS intelligence officer who was posing as a university professor. He also traveled to China 3 times since his first arrival in the U.S. While it is unclear what was discussed during these meetings, a search warrant conducted on Xi's residence in 2018 revealed several documents disguised as university study materials containing information on U.S.-based individuals generated by U.S.-based companies Intellius Inc., Instant Checkmate, and Spokio, according to Xi's indictment. All 3 sites provided publicly available data on people. Prosecutors believe that Xi was handing over information about these individuals to Chinese intelligence officials for recruitment into China's intelligence network. This is somebody in the U.S. Army Reserves we trusted. And it gets worse. From the Washington Free Beacon. First openly transgender Army officer indicted for trying to give soldiers medical info to Russia. World War III, maybe. Russia and China seems to be working together. Now, this story is basically what you get. A federal grand jury in Baltimore indicted Jamie Lee Henry and his wife, Anna Gabrielian, pronouncing that wrong probably, on charges of conspiracy and wrongful disclosure of individually identifiable health information, according to prosecutors. The couple met last month with an undercover FBI agent posing as a Russian diplomat and offered medical information from Fort Bragg, the home of the military's elite Delta Force. Gabrielian, an anesthesiologist at Johns Hopkins University, told the undercover agent during an August 17th meeting that she was motivated by patriotism towards Russia to provide any assistance she could to Russia, even if it meant being fired or going to jail. According to the indictment, Gabrielian gave the undercover agent medical information on a spouse of someone who works in the Office of Naval Intelligence and highlighted a medical issue that Russia could exploit. They were what, going to kill someone? Henry, a doctor at Fort Bragg, gave the undercover agent information on 5 patients at the military facility, according to the indictment first reported by the Baltimore Banner. Henry has been praised as a pioneer of the transgender movement after coming out as transgender in an interview with BuzzFeed in 2015. Henry claimed to be the first known active duty Army officer to come out as transgender and the first to legally change their name while in service. Henry told BuzzFeed his experience transitioning helped him in the medical field. Numerous stories, and I believe the indictment even, use male pronouns for this individual, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on in that capacity. My point here is just another story about internal security threats as it pertains to a potential conflict with Russia and China. Meta shuts down influence operations started in China, Russia. Facebook's parent company removed separate networks that were running covert influence campaigns related to U.S. politics and war in Ukraine. I think it's obvious what they're doing. They're trying to rally people to distrust the U.S. on a variety of issues. It's not really hard to do, to be completely honest. There's a lot of reasons you, as an American citizen, would distrust the American government. Namely, well, for obvious reasons, they don't give us access to confidential information. I put it this way. I don't trust the war machine. I don't trust the reason they claim to do things. I think they're lying to us, and they need the consent of the governed in order to engage in such behaviors. But I certainly think our interests as American citizens are aligned more, even with the U.S. military-industrial complex. We're aligned more with them than we would be with China or Russia. If China and Russia were to win any kind of international conflict, yet you would be subjugated and your life would get substantially worse. So there's reason to distrust them. There's reason to support efforts to stop any actions they're taking against us. That doesn't mean trust everything the U.S. government does, because they have their interests as well. The Wall Street Journal says Meta Platforms Inc. said Tuesday that it has removed separate networks in China and Russia that were running covert influence campaigns related to U.S. politics and the war in Ukraine. In a post on its blog, the Facebook parent company said it has taken down a small network that originated in China and operated across multiple social media platforms, targeting U.S. voters on both sides of the political spectrum ahead of the 2022 midterm election. The network also pushed anti-government sentiments related to the Czech Republic's foreign policy toward China and Ukraine, Meta said. The company said it has removed a large network that originated in Russia and operated across a sprawling network of more than 60 websites that were made to look like legitimate European news organizations. The network targeted Germany as well as France, Italy, Ukraine, and the UK, with narratives supporting Russia in the conflict with Ukraine and criticizing Ukrainian refugees, Meta said. Now, here's the issue I take with this. I don't trust their takedowns. I understand why they would want to do this, but I know many people, I'll leave their names out of it, who are American citizens with legitimate First Amendment protected opinions, who had their channels banned, their social media restricted because they had received funding from Russian sources. You see, here's how it works. Russia will find a way to hire or contribute to narratives that benefit them. It's a dirty play. The U.S., of course, does similar things. There are individuals who will hold opinions, one that Russia is good or that the U.S. is bad. Russia will then contribute to them, such as people who are employed by Russia Today or Sputnik. They'll find ways to directly contribute. These individuals then espouse legitimate opinions they hold, but those opinions are propped up by foreign sources. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter starts removing these organizations, saying you're illegitimate because you're funded by Russia. But their opinions are. Their opinions are legitimate. They're American citizens. You see how it works? In the United States, the way the corporate press works is they do the exact same thing. They find people who have woke opinions and they hire them, providing backing for them to espouse their message on a large platform. It's creepy. And it's hard to know how to fight because there are a lot of ways that it can be done. So what do? I don't know if I trust the U.S. in censoring speech of anyone. And there are very real issues. I'll tell you how you solve it, U.S. Maybe the U.S. should be providing funding to channels that counter these narratives. Therein lies another big problem. What, a Department of Truth? There's no real solution, is there? Russia will seek to exploit our goodwill. That what's-her-face out of New Zealand gave a speech that many people said was dystopian. But I'm going to cut her some slack. I don't like her. I think she's an authoritarian. I think it's disgusting what she's done in that country, especially with the lockdowns. I think she is mostly wrong and overzealous and authoritarian when it comes to what she said. But I think we need to understand what she said to not be fools. Jacinda Ardern, is that her name? She said there is a very real threat of disinformation. She's not wrong. The corporate press engages in it all day. She said, how do you fight climate change when people don't believe in climate change? Well, I have to ask you, why don't they believe in climate change? Maybe you should work on your messaging. Maybe you should provide funding to advocacy groups, and maybe you should find a way to push that message out better. Suppressing dissent doesn't solve anything. But there is a concern. Let's just be real. Our adversaries, be it Russia, China, or anybody else, they are going to try to sow disinformation. So what do? I'm not going to sit back and cheer on some lady who's talking about censoring ideology she doesn't like. Sorry, lady, you lose that one. You are the problem. I'm not going to sit here and dance behind the corporate press believing whatever it is they say. They're lying. So is Russia and so is China. Look, if the Washington Post came out and said Putin took a dump on the American flag, and then Putin came out and said it was actually Biden who took a dump on the Russian flag, I'm more inclined to believe Washington Post despite knowing they're liars. Because at the very least, our interests are aligned. But that being said, more inclined does not mean I do. I also recognize they're going to push U.S. propaganda. They're going to want you to hate Vladimir Putin. But if you think that Vladimir Putin is some innocent party in all this, or China is, you'd be wrong. You'd be way wrong. China's doing their creepy influence operations here. Leaked audio from 80 internal TikTok meetings show the U.S. user data has been repeatedly accessed from China. Okay. So who do you trust? Sorry, man. I don't know who you trust. But at the very least, I can tell you this. When it comes down to conflict between China and Russia, I will be standing next to the United States, not China and Russia. For all the wrong that I think Joe Biden does, for all the crooked, corrupt garbage we see from the U.S. government, when you've got two bad actors, two bad players, at least the U.S. is where I live. And there's some good here, despite all the bad. I don't think every action taken by federal actors of the federal government is always bad. I think we've got a crooked and corrupt crony establishment, that's for sure. And these people think you shouldn't be allowed to know. But there are many good people in the United States, and that's why I will stand by the United States. This country's founding is brilliant. The things it stands for are substantially better and more important than what Russia or China stand for. So what do you do, man? Foreign policy is going to play a role in the midterms, and that's fantastic. I mean, it really is. 5 midterm foreign policy shakeups to watch on Capitol Hill. This is absolutely good news. In the Ohio Senate, oh, okay, they're not going to let me read it, but fine, whatever. The fact that foreign policy is playing a role makes me feel good about what's to come because, well, I'll show you this. This is Joe Biden's approval rating. And it was around the time that Afghanistan fell that Joe Biden's approval rating flipped. I'm happy to see it. I know a lot of Americans don't care for foreign policy, but this is important. We've got war on the horizon, and we've got a president who can't do the job. These elections are important, not just because of domestic policy, gas prices, inflation, but because Joe Biden, as the commander in chief, is incapable, inept, and he should be retiring. He should not be trying to lead our armed forces. Donald Trump has his problems, but hey, him being a madman is better than whatever Biden is. You got Donald Trump being accused of being a madman, but aggressive. Joe Biden confused and bumbling about. At least Donald Trump keeps people in line and scared. It's not a good thing. Not. I should say it's not 100% a good thing, but there's good elements to it in terms of we weren't seeing this escalation while Trump was president. Perhaps Ron DeSantis would be the best choice because he's got military experience. He's a lot younger, and he's showing that he's doing a really great job, especially now with the hurricane. I'm glad to see it. But I fear it won't matter in the end. We've got internal conflict in this country to such a degree. I'm willing to bet China is sowing the seeds of discontent. TikTok, for instance. I think so. If war were to happen, I don't think the U.S. would be unified. And I think psychological operations and cyber war is something we underestimate. Oh, so some ships floated past Alaska through our economic zone? So what? Our critical infrastructure could be blown up from the other side of the planet instantly. These are the things we need to be working on. But maybe cyber warfare will provide some mutually assured destruction fears as well. For the time being, pay attention, I guess. China running secret police stations, at least one in the U.S., several in Canada, that's planting the seeds of overthrowing this country or these European countries. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.